I'm William Bell with Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Welcome to Probing the Prophets with Rod MacArthur. Join us every Friday from 11 a.m. until 12 noon Central Standard Time for an exciting adventure through the prophets with Rod MacArthur. Rod MacArthur, husband, father, grandfather, gardener of roses and veggies, Bible student, enamored of the prophets since 1972, hosts a discussion 40 years in the making. Currently living in Auburn, Washington, Rod has preached in Moscow, Idaho, Spokane, Washington, and Terre Haute, Indiana, before moving to Auburn. Welcome to Probing the Prophets with Rod.
So, I want to wish you a good morning. This is Rod, and we are back in the saddle. We're looking at the story of God unfolding through the lineage of Abraham, the promise made to Abraham, and various adventures. Can I use that word? Various adventures and episodes and experiences in the life of Abraham, his servant, then Isaac and Jacob, and now Joseph, as they illustrate and point to the ultimate thing God would do in keeping the promise made to Abraham. It's an amazing picture God paints on the canvas of human history, especially using the players of devotion to Him. Abraham and Sarah and Hagar gave us an image. Jacob at the ladder gave us a huge promise and an image. And Joseph being thrown in the pit as dead and then raised out of that pit to be a provider of the bread of life, an image. In fact, that's where we are here with Joseph, having just revealed himself to his brothers as their brother Joseph, after Judah's impassioned plea to forgive, accept my sacrifice of myself so that my brother can live. And when Joseph saw the repentant heart of a contrite man, one who now started seeing things God's way, he himself broke down and cried, revealed himself as their brother, made provisions, saved a great multitude of people by the provisions God made through him, provided for them the bread of life. So that brings us then to Joseph resettling his family, inviting his father Israel to bring his extended family into Egypt to be cared for and provided for and sustained. I think of this as the bringing of the family of God together and the gestation of a mighty nation within the protective shielding, the protective womb, if I can use that word, of Egypt. And in this environment, 70 people grew to be several million people in a couple hundred years. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But I want to paint a picture, I think the Bible picture in our minds, of the nation of Israel growing in a protected womb of Egypt until delivered by God from the oppression that nation brought to them. Fast forward, the faithful remnant of God in the days of Jesus being protected and growing within the womb of Israel until it was time for God to deliver them, and the nation gave birth to a nation. And so you have Egypt, which was synonymous of slavery and captivity, giving birth to a mighty nation because of God and his delivering abilities. And then you have physical Israel developing within the confines of the nation a new nation, which at the right time, Isaiah 65, she gave birth to an entire nation of God's people when God brought about that deliverance. So there's some parallels going on here, but we're back at the infancy of the first birth, and that is getting ready for the birth of physical Israel from the womb of physical Egypt. And we'll pick up the spiritual illustration of that, say, when we get to Matthew or to the book of Revelation, and we'll see the birth of the spiritual nation. We even pick it up in prophecy, as I've already said in Isaiah 65. But here, the story of Joseph continues, and the brothers are, the family is brought into the land, and we just went through all of that. But I'm not going to even look at Joseph as ruler in the land, and the years of plenty and the years of famine. Intriguing story, necessary story. But I want to get to chapter 49, and here in chapter 49 we have Jacob gathering his children, his sons, around him that he might give them his final word of blessing. And it's interesting how the chapter begins. You maybe have noted this, and if you haven't, you should. And if you're listening to this, you will. Here in Genesis 49, verse 1, then Jacob summoned his sons and said, "Assemble yourselves, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the days to come." A very innocuous statement. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you as time goes on. That's how we're tempted to read it, in the days to come. But if we were to look at it more closely, it's literally, I'm going to tell you what will befall you at the end of the days. At the end of the days. Now, that may be an idiom for what's going to happen later on. And maybe that's all it is in the days to come later on. But it literally says at the end of the days. So here we have an end of days prediction. And this is something that we see frequently then in the prophets, an obscure reference to some period of time that's down at the end, down at the end. It's not partway in between. It's not just later on. It's down at the end. And so here is one of the very first statements of down at the end. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen down at the end. And so here in verse 8, he turns his attention to Judah. Now, Judah's of particular interest to us because of the leadership role that Judah took. Not the first king. The first king was taken from the tribe of Benjamin, as you know, Saul, son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin. But God said, I'll let you pick your king, and then I'll give you one that is according to my desire, after my heart. This is one, you wanted that one, I want this one. And that one came from the tribe of Judah. Of course, I'm talking about David. So in verse 8, the blessing upon Judah. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him the obedience of the people. This phrase, until Shiloh, comes in many translations, and even here in the margin, until he comes to Shiloh, or until he comes to whom it belongs. You might know this later in Israel's history, when the tabernacle was set up before it moved to Jerusalem. It was at Shiloh. I don't know that that's what he's referring to here. Probably not, but maybe in a sense in which we have king and priest, both from Zechariah and then the book of Hebrews. Maybe that there is a hint of it there. I rather take it in the sense of, as so many translations do give it, until he comes to whom it is due. And to him will be the obedience of the peoples, and many translations say the gatherings of the peoples. And one is the same as the other. The people gather to render obedience, a pledge of loyalty. And so here we have Judah. And you get the picture, don't you, of powerful, dynamic leader and subduer. Here, from the prey you have gone up, and so victorious. You came back from the prey, and you couch like a lion, and no one dares disturb you. And the scepter, which is the king's official emblem of rule, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it is due. To him the peoples will give obedience. So here's a picture of something, verse 1, at the end of the days, when from Judah comes the ruler to whom the scepter staff belongs, that the peoples would obey. Reading through that, I couldn't help but think of what Paul said in Philippians 2 regarding Jesus, who emptied himself and gave up being equal with God to become a human, take on the form of a bond servant, and empty himself even to the point of death on a cross. So the worst possible death that was imaginable at the time of Paul. And therefore, verse 9, God also highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name. Again, I'm reading in Philippians 2, 9 and 10 now. Therefore God also highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So here, the prophecy in Genesis 49 from Israel himself, that the scepter the ruler's staff would not depart from Judah until the one to whom it is due comes, and to him will be the obedience of the people. And we read here in Philippians 2 that at the name of Jesus every knee would bow. And so we have this obedience given to Jesus in fulfillment of the prophecy made here in Genesis 49, which would occur at the end of the days. And that raises the question, the end of what days? Well, here's Israel blessing his family and saying the ruler's staff would depart from Judah at the end of the days. That's when the fleshly line of kings had long since gone into disrepair, the fallen house of David. The fleshly line of kings would be replaced by an eternal spiritual line, also from the house of David. But that happened at the end of the days. See? And so this helps us give a pinpoint of when the end of the days is. That transition from the fleshly rule of David to the spiritual rule of the Son of David. And so you can read, for example, in Romans 1, verses 3 and 4, how that Jesus was declared with power to be the Son of David by the resurrection from the dead. All right, pressing on. In chapter 50, then, we have the death of Israel, the mourning, the grand state burial. This was an affair of state, as noted by the great number of the Egyptian prominent ones in the entourage. This was a state burial. But after that, Joseph's sons saw Joseph as this very powerful ruler, untempered now by the intercession of his father, Israel. And so they were afraid. They were projecting upon him their own attitudes. I would go, if I were a psychologist, I might say something like that. I'm not, so I won't. Well, no, that's what they did. They saw their state through their eyes and not through his. And so they were concerned. They said, verse 15, Genesis 50:15, what if Joseph should bear a grudge against us? Now, why would they even think about bearing a grudge? Because they knew what they would do. That's what I'm saying. And pay us back for all the wrong which we did him. You know, it's so amazing. The power of forgiveness to set a person free is limited by the person himself accepting the forgiveness, accepting the genuine nature of forgiveness. Forgiveness involves sending it away. It doesn't involve filing it away, sending it away. And so it gives you an idea of what they thought forgiveness might look like. That's what I'm trying to say. And how we should look at it ourselves. Not as God's filing it away to pull out against us later on, but sending it away as though it never even existed in the first place. There's this wonderfully powerful statement at the end of the book of Micah that Hosea, Joel, Amos... Get over here to Micah and read this. It's in chapter 7. And so as I flip through my pages, getting here to finally Micah, which is right after Jonah and just before Habakkuk, here in Micah, and right before Nahum, which is right before Habakkuk, Micah 7, it says in verse 18, who is a God like you, who pardons iniquity, and passes over the rebellious act of the remnant of his possession. He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in chesed, unchanging love, loving kindness, steadfast loyalty, covenant loyalty. He delights in that. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. Yes, you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. And every time I read that, I say, and this was before there was a Jacques Cousteau who had his bathysphere, who could go down deep and find him again. That's not the point, obviously. To cast all their sins to the depths of the sea means to throw them away in an unretrievable manner. Okay? And so Joseph's brothers didn't see that happening, but that's what we should see. When God forgives, they're gone. They're not filed away, they're sent away to the depths of the sea. They're gone. His brothers didn't see it that way. Thus, so they sent a message. They didn't even go in person. They sent a message. Your father charged you before he died, saying, forgive your brothers. Don't hold it against them. And so Joseph wept when he heard that. He knew what was going on in their hearts and minds, their anxiety, their lack of failure to forgive themselves, and just like so many people, you just got to cry inside that they can't let it go. So he brought them to himself. Here, verse 18. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This reminds me of what Paul said at the end of Romans 12. Now, it's translated almost universally, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. But I did some work on that the other day, and it amazed me. The statement was not, do not be overcome by evil, as though it were a passive, don't let evil overcome you. But it's an active, do not overcome by evil. In other words, do not try to prevail or get even or rise above or even the score by doing something wrong, but overcome evil by good. You have evil coming at you, and you can try to fight it off by being they deserve what they got, that kind of excuse. If they hadn't said that, I wouldn't have had to do this, justifying acting in a bad way and saying it's their fault. Paul says, don't take evil on by doing evil, but overcome the evil by doing good. You see that illustrated here in the brothers of Joseph. Joseph rose above their evil by doing good. First of all, we saw how he manipulated their emotions to the point where they came face to face with the horror of what they did, and we saw Judah willing to give himself up rather than hurt his father again. And so Joseph overcame their evil by bringing out their good, and here they're afraid of him, but he rises above that. Yeah, you did it. You meant it for me. You meant evil to me. You were bad, but God overruled the bad, and we've got to remember that too. He causes all things to work together for good, Paul said in Romans 8, and he was especially talking about the groaning of creation and the birth that was about to take place. And we know that was not a pleasant thing. It was a travail, and Jesus, when he talked about the travail that was about to come, he was talking about the destroying of the temple in Matthew 24. So it was a harsh thing that was about to take place. But we know that God causes all things to work together for good. So in the context of the, as Jesus called it in Matthew 24, the Great Tribulation, like the like of which had never occurred and never would again, out of that Great Tribulation would come good because of God. And so here the brothers, you meant it to me for evil, but God meant it for good, to bring about this good result. And so measure the actions that you did, and I see some power here that Joseph is telling his brothers, the thing you did actually produced good. Not because you thought that it would produce good, but because our God is powerful enough to bring that about. And that's a powerful message, not to be lost just on 10 brothers who acted wickedly toward Joseph, but a powerful lesson that the working of God in the bad things in life brings about a good result, or it has the power to bring about a good result. And that must always resonate with us, that with God in control, you read the Romans passage carefully, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him and are called according to purpose. And so there's this, I love God, and there's a purpose for this. And God causes good to come for them. And so here, Joseph, I know that you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about this present result and preserve many people alive. So therefore, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. The assurance that he gave them concerning the outcome, concerning his heart. I believe that Joseph is modeling God to these people as far as heart, as far as compassion, as far as provision and protection. In fact, he is called a father to Pharaoh. That Joseph became a father to Pharaoh, and which is just an amazing amazing fact. That's what a father does. All right, pressing on. We have here then one final thought from the book of Genesis before we move our discussion on into Exodus, and that is Joseph himself, as he was on the die. Joseph said to his brothers, verse 24, 50:24, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so he made them swear, take my bones with you when you go. So think of what it would have been like to be Joseph when you died. Such a prominent ruler in Egypt. We don't have a word, not a single word, about his burial, about the pomp, the ceremony, the mourning throughout the land, the statuary that may or may not have been built to him. And not a word, just this. With his brothers, saying, when I die, you make sure my bones, when you leave, you make sure my bones go with you to the land that God promised. I want to be buried in that land. Meant a lot to him. He looked forward, not to staying in the pomp and glory of Egypt, but being in the among the people of God. Very much, if you will, like Moses in this. In Hebrews 11, we read about Moses, where it says, by faith, Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. He was looking for the reward. In the same chapter, verse 21, 11:21, by faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exoduses of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. These things are real. They were real in the mind of Jacob. They were real in the mind of Joseph, to the point where they could make instruction. Do this. Yeah, right. When Superman flies around the earth backwards and time stands still, in fact, time turns back, then I want you to do this. You know what shelf you're going to put that on. It's never going to happen, so you don't have to worry about it. But Joseph understood. We're leaving here. We're getting out of here. And not only are we getting out, we're going in. We have a land that God promises. We're going there. And so an absolute faith in God and prompted this promise, extracting a promise from the leaders of the nation. And so he died, and he was buried. He was embalmed, placed in a coffin in Egypt, and that's all we know. Nothing about the pomp and the ceremony. But that brings us then to the book of Exodus. Exodus is a Greek word, meaning out of, and hodos means the way. You want to check how far you've gone. You look at what? You look at the odometer. Hodos is the Greek word for way or path, and meter is measure. And so you've measured how long you've gone. So hodos, the way, the path. Ex, out of, the way out of. And so we have the Exodus. Again, a Greek word, as is Deuteronomy, by the way. A Greek word for the time when Israel went out. See, we ended Genesis. I know that God will take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up. God is going to bring you up, verse 24, from this land to that land. There's going to be going out. That's how Genesis ends. The next book is the going out. So the story continues with fulfillment of expectation. Now, the going out involved a change of dynasty. That's what we read in Exodus 1, a change of dynasty, where there was harsh and rigorous, demanding, and in fact, a fear of the nation of Israel because of the largeness and the possibility that they might become an internal ally against Egypt with some other nation. So let's try to limit the numbers of men that are born, and in fact tell the midwives to kill them if they find them born. And that's, of course, why Moses was squirreled away in the Nile, and how it came that he's found by the daughter of Pharaoh and became adopted into Pharaoh's family, but was nourished both mentally, spiritually, as well as physically by his mother until he was able to go and live independent of her in the palace of the king. And how old would that be? Early teens, maybe? I don't know. I don't take weaning here as quit nursing, but weaning, I no longer need the protective, loving care of mom to be able to make it. So I don't know what age he was when he started. I would think probably preteen, early teen, somewhere in there. But that's just my conjecture. The Bible says until he was weaned. Okay, so he went into house of Pharaoh, got crosswise with the house of Pharaoh, fled to the land of Midian. All this taking place in chapter 1 and 2. And by the end of chapter 2, you've covered 80 years just in one chapter. And then Moses saw the burning bush in chapter 3. And that's when he started interacting with Yahweh God. I, verse 6, am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face and was afraid to look at God. And then down in verse 12, then God said to 13, God said to Moses, behold, I'm going to send you. Moses said to God, I'll get it straight. Moses said to God, I am going to send you to the sons of Israel, and I shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I tell them? See, Moses didn't know the name of God. And then God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent you. Now you can see right there both the agitation on the part of the Jews when Jesus said to them, before Abraham became, I am. That they would have, before Abraham even came into being, I am. You're not yet 50 years old. And you've seen Abraham? Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and he was glad of that conversation. But you can see why they would be agitated because of the connection that Jesus made here. But you can also see something more. When did God declare his name? I am. Well, it's when Moses was sent to deliver the people from Egypt. Here Jesus comes on the scene and says, I am. And he was there to deliver the people from Egypt. Not physical Egypt, But you know what Jesus himself, or what John said in Revelation 11, that the great city, which is mystically or spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. There's only one city in the whole world, ever, where the Lord was crucified, and that was Jerusalem, but it's spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. And so I'm going to deliver my people from Egypt. I am. So God presented himself as the I am here. Now, this I am who I am is an interesting, and then when he comes down here in verse 16, well, I'll just keep on reading. Verse 15, and God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent you. Now, up in verse 6, God appeared and just said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here he says, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he says, this is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. And I want to go on record here, even though we find Yahweh in the text of Genesis, here he says, I'm revealing my name. In fact, in chapter 6, he says, in verse 3, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. And yet you find them using the name Yahweh. Well, there's two explanations of that. Either one is viable and both might be in play. And the one is as a national god, as the god of a nation, like Egypt had its national gods, Isis and others, and Babylon had its national god, and Assyria had its national god, and you know, gods like Marduk and Moloch and other gods. Nations had gods, and they were known as that nation's god. Well, what nation did Yahweh have at this time? He didn't have one, and so he wasn't known in the log of the register of the gods of the nations, if there was such a thing. But you see my point. You could list the nations, and you could say, well, that's their god, that's their god, and where was Yahweh in that list? He didn't exist, so I wasn't known by that. Or similar to that. Another explanation, that's what I'm trying to say, another explanation why Yahweh appears in the book of Genesis could be not from the standpoint of the writers of the various records, and I think there's at least 11, probably 12 records that are combined together, each with the section titled the book of the generations of. I think we went over that when we were going through Genesis. The book of the generations of, and our section breaks. And so you have Moses as a compiler of these ancient records, putting them together in written form for the first time as a compiled text. Moses knew the name Yahweh, and it would be easy for him to let the readers know. And I think the book of Genesis was written for the purpose of introducing Yahweh as the national God of Israel to Israel, for them to know their God. Well, for them to know their God by his covenant name, Moses would use the covenant name in those texts where he was the prominent force in the life of their forefathers. So either and both explanations make a lot of sense to me. It's up to you to come up with your own. But here's the place where Yahweh says, "That's my that's my memorial name to all generations," and that's why, by the way, if you're reading from the New American Standard, in the Old you'll find the word Lord in all uppercase letters, capital L, then small but uppercase O-R-D. Sometimes when it's Lord God, and the word Lord is from Adonai, then the word God is from Yahweh, they will put the G-O-D all in uppercase letters. So generally it's L-O-R-D, but sometimes it's G-O-D, all in uppercase letters. The all uppercase letters indicate this is Yahweh. That's what the translators are doing to indicate this is where the tetragrammaton, the four-letter, Yahweh, Yod-He, Vah-He, Y-H-W-H, that's what this word is. And I choose to say Yahweh because he chose to say that's my memorial name. Lord is not a name, it's a title. The Lord, just the words themselves take our attention to the one who owns me, the one who has the rights over me. I voluntarily follow him, and it doesn't necessarily give a negative connotation, but it doesn't give personality or personal connection. Yahweh does. My Father. Jesus never used Yahweh, but and I don't believe he ever referred to God as the Lord, but my Father or our Father. And so that again, that personal. This is my memorial name. You know, if somebody calls me boss or somebody calls me Rod, you see there's a different relationship just in the term that they call me. So my memorial name, and I really didn't even intend to get into that, but it's really an important thought, because when we come over here to chapter 5, so the intervening is Moses debating with God about why he's not the one, and God winning that debate and giving him the signs and sending him to the sons of Israel and getting them all excited about the potential of being delivered almost tomorrow, and then Moses going to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh throwing a wrench in the monkey works. And so what we have here in chapter 5 is Moses and Aaron come up to Pharaoh and say, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel." I laugh because think about what this must have been to Pharaoh. The God of Israel, huh? This slave people who've been building my pyramids and making my brick and under my thumb, the God of that people, huh? It must be a powerful God or a caring God to let them languish like this under my power. He hasn't done anything yet, and in fact, he says in verse 2, Pharaoh said, "Who is Yahweh? Who is this pipsqueak God of this servile nation, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know him. I don't know Yahweh. And besides, I'm not going to let Israel go." Now, if you were to walk in here into my office and start talking to me about some obscure god of a nation that is held in the middle of Siberia, they're being held captive to work in the salt mines or whatever they got going on over there, and you say, that God is demanding that the world let his people go. And I said, who? What God are you talking about? I've never heard of him. And you got to sense it in what Pharaoh is here. And you put yourself in Pharaoh's seat and think about the labor you're going to lose. But more than that here's a people that nobody cares about, and now you're making up a God to say we want to get out of here. You're just lazy. You just think you got too much idle time in your hands. Make up a God that you think's going to take you out from under my loving watch care. And so he increased their workload. And this increased workload got the people upset, and they came to their taskmasters and they said, "Well, it's because you guys want to go out in the wilderness and worship it." And so they got upset with Moses, and Moses got upset with God. And in verse 21, they said to Moses, "May Yahweh look upon you and judge, for you have made us odious. It's your fault that our workload is heavy. You haven't delivered us at all. You just got us working harder. May this God you're talking about judge you. Then Moses returned to Yahweh, verse 22, and said, "O Yahweh, why have you brought harm to this people? I mean, you said you're going to deliver them, and now it's worse. Well, why did you ever send me? If I hadn't come here, they wouldn't be as bad off as they are. Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done harm to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. It's your fault. They blame me, and I blame you. If you hadn't sent me, and I pleaded with you not to send me, if you hadn't sent me, they'd just be as bad off as they were, not as bad off as they are now. Now they really hate me." And I love how chapter 6 gets going. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Now ye shall see what I will do to Pharaoh." What the people took as a failure, God took as stage setting. I'm getting it ready. I've got him. I've kind of tweaked his nose. And he says, "I don't know that God. I'm not going to. I'm going to do this instead." And so I got his back up. I've got him heels dug in. I've got him focused on this phantom God as he thinks it, and this people that are yearning to get out from under my thumb. I'll show them. So now you're going to see what I can do. For under compulsion he shall let them go, and under compulsion he shall drive them out of his land. It's actually going to come where he kicks them out. But I'm going to force him to. God spoke further, and Moses said to him, "I am Yahweh, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but by name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them." We've covered that already. Let's move on. Furthermore, I want to get this in verse 4. "And I will establish," so I'm making a new presentation of myself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's offspring. I'm showing them something about me that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob never saw. "And I will establish my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan." Now, wouldn't that have been easy, just let them settle there when Abraham was a nomad and wandering through? Wouldn't it have been just easy to let them settle there and expand into the land? Yeah, it would have been. But God had bigger things in mind. I want to show people what a delivering God I am. I want to show people what a powerful, caring God I am. I want to show people the miracle ability of their God to get them out of anything that they get themselves into. If he'd just given them the land, they wouldn't have had that lesson at all. So I'm going to establish that covenant. I'm doing it my way. I'm going to establish my covenant to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned, and furthermore I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. I wonder what it was like. Isaiah talks about a people who groan over the ruins of Zion. And he was not talking about the physical debris, though that would be the illustration. But he was talking about how the God's city could come so low, which would be a debasing of their God. He says, "I have heard their groanings." And Isaiah talks about how that those people would be the ones that would be delivered when Messiah came. And so there would be those kind of groanings. And Paul talked about those groanings in Romans 8, didn't he? At the time when the sons were about to be born, there were groanings. And so Paul talked about those. And here then is the parallel. I have heard their groanings. And what am I going to do? I'm going to keep the covenant that I made. Well, later on in time, as Israel began to see that the covenant that they had with God was not working for them because of them, and that's what the Hebrews writer said in chapter 8, finding fault with them, not with the covenant, but with them. He said in Jeremiah 31, Hebrews 8 quotes Jeremiah 31. He says, I will make a new covenant. I'll make a new covenant. And so here, I will remember my covenant. When God delivered physical Israel from the bondage of Egypt, he was remembering covenant. Parallel, when God delivered the faithful remnant, the spiritual Israel, from the bondage of the law and the people of the law, he was remembering the new covenant. So you got these parallels. So here God rises up and says, I will remember my covenant. I will remember them. I will establish my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned. And further, I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel because of the Egyptians, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage. I have also remembered my covenant. So say, therefore, to the sons of Israel, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of Egypt. And I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for possession. I am Yahweh. So the declaration of a promise-keeping Yahweh, of a delivering Yahweh, of a compassionate Yahweh. The picture I want us to see of God's knowing that they were burdened under this bondage, and that he would rise up and deliver. He would not just set them free, he would take them as his family. He would enter into covenant with them, and he'd put them on the land. A picture of a future occurrence. A physical picture of a later on, end of the days, occurrence spiritually. Take you as my people, bring you into as my family, sons and daughters, and bring you into covenant with me and put you on the land. All right. Now that's going to give rise to Moses' song in Deuteronomy 32 when we get there. The idea of God's land, and that he put his family on. We got this promise-keeping God going to deliver. I'm going to come down and show you my power. You've not seen my power. You've not seen me ever deliver a nation before. You've not seen me come up against an entire nation. I choose the biggest nation on the block. You go to a new school and you want to establish yourself. A friend of mine told me this. You want to establish yourself as somebody to be reckoned with. You don't pick out the wimp. You go to the biggest bully and you face him up. And once you've established your ground with him, you got it with everybody. So God didn't pick some little pipsqueak nation to go up against. He chose the nation that ruled the world at that time. He chose Egypt to go up against Egypt and deliver his people. Pharaoh asked a question in chapter 5, who is Yahweh? A friend of mine said, Pharaoh asked a question, who is Yahweh? So Yahweh sent him a 10-lesson correspondence course, and here's who I am. I kind of like that. The 10 plagues equal I am Yahweh. And the reality is, as you go through those plagues, the magicians try to mimic the plagues, but they couldn't stop the plague. They couldn't subdue the plague. They couldn't reverse the plague. All they could do is try to imitate it, only for the first couple, and then they quit doing that and said, this is the finger of God. In other words, I am Yahweh, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. I am here to rescue my people, and you can't stop me. I'll give you the choice of doing it willingly, or I can do it under compulsion, but you can't stop me. I am Yahweh. In fact, I want to fast forward time-wise and get this for sure. Come over here to chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the preparation for the Passover. The 10th plague hasn't taken place yet. It does at verse 29 of chapter 12, but it hasn't taken place yet. The first 9 have, including the extreme darkness, the prolonged darkness, and Moses is getting the people ready to leave under compulsion. Because when the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, comes, Pharaoh literally drives them out. Get out, go on. Everybody, we don't want to see what the next thing that happens when we resist your God. Say, I am Yahweh, and there's nothing you can do about it. And as they kept trying, they kept losing and losing and losing and losing. Pretty much all the gains that they made with Joseph at the helm, they lost because of holding God's people. But verse 12, chapter 12, verse 12 sums it up. He says, getting ready for this Passover, get ready to leave under compulsion, because I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. Every god of Egypt fell before the God of Israel. Not a god could stand, not a single national god. The sub-gods, the minor gods, even the great God. Ra, the god of the sun. 3 days there was no sun. Yahweh prevailed over all the gods of Egypt. Who is Yahweh? He is the God. In him is deliverance. There is no one else. That was the point that was driven home by the 10 plagues. Now, in the little bit of time that we have left, I want to share something with you. As Pharaoh started seeing the pressure of this almighty delivering God, he started to dicker with him. He started to make bargains. For example, in 8:25, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." Oh, you can worship your God, just don't leave the world that you're in. Moses said, "No, we got to go." And so he made a second compromise in verse 28, and then Pharaoh said, "I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to Yahweh your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far." If you want to go out and you want to leave the world a little bit to go worship God, go do it, but don't go very far away. Stay close. In chapter 10, in verses 8 through 11, Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve Yahweh your God." And who is the ones who are going? Go ahead and go serve him. You can go out in the wilderness, you can go as far as you want. Who's going? Moses said, "We shall go with our young, our old, with our sons and daughters, with our flocks and our herds we will go, for we must hold a feast to Yahweh." Then he said to them, "May Yahweh be with you, if ever I let you and your little ones go. Take heed, for evil is in your mind. Not so. Go now, the men, and serve Yahweh, for that is what you desire." And he drove them out. So don't take your family to serve your God. Just you men go do it. So he's making these compromises that try to keep them hooked into their bondage. Final one, in verse 24. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go serve Yahweh, only let your flocks and herds be detained. Even your little ones may go with you." You can take your families, just leave all your material goods here in the world. But Moses said, "You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God." In other words, how do I serve my God except with the things I have? "Therefore our livestock will go with us, not a hoof will be left behind." So I see the compromises that Pharaoh offered, the very kinds of things that people fall prey to today in serving God, the same God. They don't want to go very far. They want to stay in the world. They don't want to get very far away from it. They make sure they don't involve their family in it, and certainly not their material goods. And Moses said, "We're not even leaving a hoof behind. We're serving God. We're taking everything." There's a couple other things that I want to share with you about the Exodus. Our time is gone today. We'll start there and move forward, looking at some of the tabernacle illustrations next week. Until then, I wish God's very best upon you. May Yahweh be with you always. This is Rod saying goodbye.
Whoever is wise let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of Yahweh are right, and the righteous will walk in them, but transgressors will stumble in them. For the past hour, you've been listening to Probing the Prophets with Rod MacArthur. Stay tuned each Friday for Probing the Prophets with Rod MacArthur, right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.